everyone, and welcome back to Learning Kitchen Live. This is our 6th episode, and I'm so excited to be with you here today. My name is Valerie Machinist, and I'm the Manager of Nutrition Services here at Community Servings. And today we are talking all about tofu. And just stay with me. I know tofu is not a favorite of everybody's, and it scares some people off, but I'm going to show you some ways to make it super delicious. And we're also going to talk a little bit about meat alternatives and protein alternatives if you do in fact want to start embracing a little bit more of a plant-based diet. So the recipes I'm going to show you today are just 2 simple ways to do that, to transform tofu into something really delicious. And we're going to have a conversation about some other good things that are out there. So the recipes we're making today are a crispy baked tofu with a peanut dipping sauce and a Mexican chocolate tofu pudding. And just, again, stay with me. These are so delicious, and it's going to change the way you think about tofu forever. So we're going to start with the crispy tofu. And I'm assuming many people have seen tofu, but if you haven't, this right here is a block of extra firm tofu. And tofu is basically coagulated and molded soy milk. That's really it. And the thing that's really wonderful about it with cooking is it takes on the flavor of whatever you're doing with it. But eating just this, like a plain block of tofu, is not the most delicious thing. So like I said, we're going to transform this into something super delicious. And again, for those of you just joining us, my name is Valerie, and welcome to Learning Kitchen Live. So tofu comes in a variety of different forms. For this crispy baked tofu, I am going to use extra firm, and it comes in extra firm, soft, and silken. So those are typically the 4 ways you can find tofu in the grocery store, and it's usually in the produce aisle of your grocery store. And you want to use extra firm and firm for things where you need it to hold its shape. So for this, we're going to cube it, for example, and we want it to stay in its shape. If you're doing stir fries, same thing. You want extra firm or firm. Soft tofu is usually what you'll find in soups. So it'll be cubed up and simmered in broth. That's usually where you'll find soft. And then silken is what we're going to use for this pudding. And I'll talk more about that later, but it's actually, it's kind of like what it sounds like. It's this very soft, almost custard-like texture, and that's what you want to use when you're doing things like puddings or smoothies or things where you're going to blend it up. So what I'm going to start by doing is cubing this block of tofu. This is just a pound of extra firm tofu. And just cutting it into bite-sized pieces. You could cut this however you want, strips, kind of bigger planks. For this, I like cubes. And something that you don't have to do, but I think can make a difference, is you're going to drain some of the liquid out of the tofu. So all I'm doing is I'm just going to set it on some paper towels for a few minutes and pat it down with some more paper towels. You can, sometimes I'll put like a weight or another pan on top and weight it down, but right now I'm just going to let this drain for just a few minutes. You don't need to do it for all that long, and we're going to get some of the extra moisture out of it, which will help make it really crispy in the oven. While that's draining, what I am going to do is make this delicious peanut dipping sauce. And I got to tell you, this peanut dipping sauce would make just about anything taste delicious. You can use it with tofu, you can use it with chicken, with beef, with like grilled or broiled vegetables. Like I'd eat it myself, just plain, like actually spoon feed it to myself. So it's really versatile, but it tastes really good with this. So for this recipe, we're going to start with half a cup of creamy peanut butter. And again, if you're just joining us, this is Learning Kitchen Live, and we're talking today about tofu and meat alternatives. So I prefer all natural creamy peanut butter. I think from a nutritionist standpoint, when you're buying peanut butter, it should have 1 or 2 ingredients, peanuts and maybe salt. I like the salted variety. most of the time, but you can also buy unsalted and season it yourself if you need to. The oil separates out in natural peanut butter a little bit, so you just have to give it a quick stir. And I am going to use a half a cup. I'm just putting this in the bowl because invariably I'm going to spill some. And if you don't eat peanut butter or you're allergic, you could actually make this sauce with other nut butters. Like I think cashew butter would be really good with this. You could use tahini, sesame tahini. If you're allergic, you could use soy butter. So if you have a preference other than peanut butter, you could use any variety of nut butters or pastes with this. I am going to mix in 3 tablespoons of rice vinegar, which is a really nice mild vinegar. And then 2 tablespoons of low sodium soy sauce. A tablespoon of honey. And you could eliminate the honey if you didn't want to add the extra sweetness. I happen to, and my honey is a little solid, so what we're going to do is come back to the honey. If you wanted to eliminate the honey, you could. If you wanted to make this vegan, you could use agave syrup or maple syrup. We'll see if my honey comes out of there, and if not, we may just skip it. Some minced garlic, one clove of minced garlic, which I have here. Quarter teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes, and if you don't like heat, you could eliminate that. And then a teaspoon of grated fresh ginger. So this is ginger root for anyone who's not familiar with it. And I'm just going to grate it on a microplane. You could also use powdered ginger if you didn't have fresh ginger, but I think the flavor of fresh ginger is a little bit better in this. You want to just make sure you don't get. Okay, that just flew away, so I'm going to just cut the outer part off of this because we don't want to pick that up off the floor. Ginger's really great and gives a really nice spicy flavor to this. And all you have to do if you've never grated ginger is just cut the outer rind off and use a microplane or a box grater. And we're going to try not to let this one slip and go flying onto the floor. So one of the reasons I wanted to do these recipes for Learning Kitchen Live is that I really think that tofu is a great alternative to eating meat, but there's also so many other varieties of meat alternatives out there now that we all kind of thought it would be a good opportunity to talk about those things. And I actually see my colleague Beth, who you saw last week, has agave syrup handy, and I'm going to have her just run around and hand that to me. Thank you. So, thank you, Beth. She's behind the scenes with Eileen, our wonderful communications team, making this happen. But agave syrup is vegan, and it's very similar to honey or to maple syrup in that it's a liquid form of sweetness. So we're just going to use that in this instead. And about equal parts, so I'm just going to use a tablespoon of agave in this. All right, and I have about a teaspoon of grated fresh ginger, teaspoon and a half. And then all that has to happen is I'm going to whisk this together, and it will be a delicious peanut sauce. So, you know, for people who are not vegetarian or vegan, you may be wondering, like, why mess around with things like meat alternatives and tofu and all of these things. And, you know, I think there's a lot of reasons. I personally am not a vegetarian. I don't eat a ton of meat, but I do eat meat. But I happen to love tofu and meat alternatives, mostly for the variety that they bring to my diet and just getting to try different things and different flavors and textures. And also, if you tuned in last week, Beth talked a little bit about, she was talking about food waste, but she also talked a lot about the environmental impacts of food waste and sustainability in eating. And eating less meat really can make a difference on our climate, on the environment. And so if that compels you, it's also a good reason to try some of these alternatives. They're also healthy for you. Not that meat's unhealthy, but they tend to be a little bit lower in calories than meat. They tend to have little to no saturated fat. And they're just a good alternative to try once in a while. So I hope I convince you today to give some of these a try. All right, so we have our peanut dipping sauce. It's a little thick. I may add some water to thin it out at some point. But what we're going to do next is the tofu. So now that this has drained a little bit, and we've gotten some of that excess liquid out, and I don't know if the camera is going to do it justice, but it really is like much drier than it was when it came out of the package. Tofu is usually packaged with some water around it. And we're going to put it in a bowl. And just for anyone who's just tuning in now, this is Learning Kitchen Live, and we are talking today about tofu and meat alternatives. And I am making a crispy tofu with a peanut dipping sauce. So here's our tofu, and what we're going to do to make this crispy is coat it in oil and cornstarch, and when it bakes up, it gets this wonderful texture like it's been deep fried, but it's way healthier for you than deep frying tofu. And I'll be honest with you, deep fried tofu is delicious, but this is a lot healthier than that. At this point, you could also add some flavor to it. I'm not going to today because the peanut sauce really speaks for itself. But you could add a little bit of rice vinegar and soy sauce right now and mix it up and let it soak in a little bit. Some hot pepper flakes, really anything you wanted, because tofu, again, is sort of like a blank canvas. It really soaks up the flavor of what you cook it in. So I have about a tablespoon of canola oil here that I'm going to mix this with. And I'm going to sprinkle about a tablespoon of cornstarch over this. If you didn't want to use cornstarch, if you don't like it, if you have a sensitivity to it, you could use arrowroot powder, which is very similar, but without the corn part. But it can be used with thickening properties when you're cooking, and it also will give this a nice crispy texture. So that's it. I'm going to put this on a baking sheet and spread it out. And this is going to go into a 400-degree oven. Now, at home, you'd want to cook this for about 10 minutes, check on it, give it a stir, and then put it back in for maybe 10 or 15 more minutes. The industrial ovens we have here at Community Servings are going to cook it a little faster. So I'm going to check on this in about 5 minutes. Be right back. All right, so while our tofu is crisping up in the oven, we're going to work a little bit on our chocolate pudding, and we can talk a little bit more about meat alternatives. And I know it seems strange to make a chocolate pudding out of tofu. I've been doing this for years, actually. There's one of the very first vegetarian cookbooks that was out there back in the 70s. It was called Molly Katzen's Vegetable Heaven. She's one of the pioneers of vegetarian cooking in this country, and she had a tofu-based chocolate pudding. It was, I think, a chocolate banana pudding that I used to make for years. And the thing that's amazing about this is that you would never know it's dairy-free if you didn't tell anybody it was dairy-free. They would never know. It's super creamy and delicious. It's really rich. The tofu, in this case, actually is more used to give it a really good texture than make a statement about it being vegetarian or vegan. So So again, stay with me. And if you wanted to make this vegan, you would just use vegan chocolate chips. These happen to be just regular semi-sweet chocolate chips. So what I did beforehand was made a simple syrup that I'm just going to heat up a tiny bit. And a simple syrup is just equal parts sugar and water. So I boiled a half a cup sugar with a half a cup water until the sugar dissolved, and I just let it cool. And what I'm going to do is, once this is warm enough, I am going to put the chocolate chips in and just let them melt in there, and that avoids having to melt them in a double boiler or in the microwave, which you certainly could also do. All right, that is good and warm. So what I have here are 8 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate chips, and you could use bittersweet chocolate. I'm not sure I would do milk chocolate with this. It might be a little too sweet, but if you really like sweet things, that would be perfect. So all I'm doing is letting the chocolate chips, I'm going to let them sit here and let them get warm and melt, which they will do probably in a few minutes, and just incorporate them into the simple syrup, and then everything is going to go in a blender. So while those melt up, I am going to move my blender over and get the rest of the ingredients ready. So when it comes to meat alternatives, there's kind of two camps of these. There's sort of the old school meat alternatives, and those are things that that have been around forever, for like probably hundreds and thousands of years. Things like tofu, which is a traditional food that's been around forever. Tempeh, which is fermented soybeans. It has like a very nutty flavor. If you've ever seen it, it almost looks like a nutty steak shape, and it needs to be cooked before you eat it to get some of the bitterness out of it. And then there's seitan, which is spelled S-E-I-T-A-N, and seitan is made from vital wheat gluten, so it's not gluten-free, but it's a really good source of protein, and it also, similar to tofu, takes on the flavor and texture or the flavor of whatever you're cooking it in. It's great in stir fries, for example. And then there's something called jackfruit, which is another really interesting meat alternative, and it is what it sounds like. It's actually a fruit, and when it's ripe, it's a very fruity fruit. It tastes like you would expect fruit to taste. But the unripe jackfruit, you can usually find it canned, believe it or not. It actually has a very stringy texture and a very almost no flavor really. And it's a really great meat substitute for things like pulled chicken or shredded chicken and pulled pork. And if you cook it in something saucy, it really takes on the texture of like pulled meat. So it's great for things like tacos or sandwiches and things like that. And it's canned, so it's super shelf stable, and a great thing. You can get it at Trader Joe's and Whole Foods and a lot of just mainstream grocery stores now. The other things that are out there that are meat alternatives are minced chicken, and you can do whatever you would do with like strips of chicken with it. There's all sorts of plant-based burgers and other things that either mimic meat or are like garden burgers that taste a little bit more like grains. And then there's this whole new world of the Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger and meats like that. I'm trying not to get this tofu all over the place, I apologize. That really have the taste and texture and flavor of ground beef. They come in usually in ground beef form or sausage form, and they're remarkable. They're plant-based, and they are an amazing substitute if you want to make burgers or tacos or anything like bolognese sauce, chili, anything you would use ground beef in. So it's really, they're a new product. They're making their way to most grocery stores now. And they're a great alternative if you want to kind of venture into this less meat, but I like meat flavor type of world. So I don't know if you can see, I just put the silken tofu in here, and it really does have like a texture almost like pudding or custard, which is why like you really can't do things like stir fries with it, but again, it's perfect for something like this. So before I blend this up, I'm just going to check on my tofu and see how it's doing. It's coming along really nicely. I'm just going to give it a quick stir. Probably needs a few more minutes to get really golden brown and crisp. It's stuck a little bit on this baking sheet. If you have parchment paper or foil, that's sometimes a really good thing to cook this on, just so it sticks a little bit less. All right, so back in the oven. And so what I'm going to add to make this pudding, I have my chocolate, which is nice and melted now in the simple syrup. So I am going to add this to the blender. You could use a food processor too if you didn't have a blender. Oops, I'm having a hard time keeping things where they belong today. And then to this, I am going to add a teaspoon of vanilla extract. It's a new bottle with a safety seal on, which is good. And I'm just going to eyeball that. And then what we're doing with this is we're actually going to give this a little bit of a kick with some cinnamon and some chili powder. So we're making a Mexican chocolate pudding, and the flavors of cinnamon and chili are traditional in Mexican chocolate. I think it makes this delicious, but if you were wary of that, you could absolutely leave this out and just do the simple syrup chocolate, the tofu, and the vanilla, and it would be delicious just standalone like that. But we're gonna get a little crazy here and add these spices. And just blend this up. That looks pretty good to me. Scrape the sides down and blend it for like 2 more seconds, and you will have a delicious chocolate pudding. Just one more whirl. All right. That was so easy to make, and when it's done, it looks beautiful. Now, you would want this to chill in the fridge for at least 30 minutes before eating it if you wanted to have like a more solid pudding texture to it. This is still a little bit more like smoothie than pudding, but if you let it chill, it'll solidify some as the chocolate gets a little hard. But there you go. You have a beautiful chocolate pudding with a wonderful flavor to it, and super easy to make. So the last thing we're going to do is finish up our tofu. That should be out of the oven in a minute. I am actually going to grab a tiny bit of water just to thin this out a little bit. It's a little bit thick. There we go. You want this to be more of a sauce that you could dip in, not something that your tofu is going to get stuck in. So I hope you've learned a few things about the alternatives to meat that are out there. You know, soy is an interesting food in that it's super healthy. It has lots of protein and fiber and B vitamins and magnesium and isoflavones and all these wonderful nutrients. It has also garnered some controversy over the years. Soy isoflavones can mimic estrogen in the body, and that has led to some concern over time about what that might do, especially to women, and what it might what role soy could play in certain cancers, especially breast cancer and prostate cancer. What the research generally shows is that if you're eating moderate amounts of whole soy foods, so things like tofu and tempeh, and soybeans and soy milk and things like that, you're probably okay. You know, a lot of research shows that people who live in countries where soy and tofu are a staple of the diet actually have lower rates of things like breast cancer. Now that could be for a lot of reasons, but the tofu is not contributing to it. Where soy can become slightly problematic is if you start taking a lot of soy supplements or like soy protein isolates in shakes and things like that. It's not that they're going to necessarily be harmful, but if you start consuming large quantities of those things, especially if you're at risk for certain cancers, you might want to be a little mindful, or at least talk to your doctor or a dietitian about it. But in general, the research shows that eating whole soy foods is not going to increase risk for most cancers. In fact, it's a really healthy addition to your diet in place of things like meat, and can actually reduce the risk for things like heart disease and other cancers. So I'm going to go grab my tofu out of the oven. I'm going to just sprinkle this with a little scallion for some color and extra flavor. So we have this beautiful peanut dipping sauce. And here we have the final product. It's the tofu is nice and golden brown and nice and crisp on the outside. You could even let this go a little longer if you want it like super crisp. But in the interest of time, I am going to plate some of that up with some of this wonderful sauce. And if you serve this alongside some brown rice and some vegetables or a salad, you'd have such a wonderful complete meal. Really tasty too. And then some delicious chocolate pudding for dessert. So I can pause and take any questions. Are there some questions?
Yeah, someone is asking if it's possible or a very responsive process to be healthy.
So the question was about the Impossible Burger, and it is a processed food. So there's the Beyond Burger or Beyond Meat, and then the Impossible Burger, and they're two slightly different products, even though they kind of look and cook up the same. The Beyond Burger is plant-based, as is the Impossible Burger. I do know that the Impossible Burger has some genetically modified foods, or genetically modified items in it, which is off-putting to some people, but it's also healthy. The thing, my nutrition colleagues and I talk about this quite a bit, because the thing with the Beyond Burger and the Impossible Burger is that you're not necessarily going to save yourself calories or fat by eating them. They're actually, like, when put up against ground beef, they're pretty similar, but they're plant-based. So it's a great option. In Burger King, for example, has its Impossible Whopper, I believe, and it's good. I've had it there. You can ask them to prepare it in the microwave if you don't want it put on a grill with the regular meat burgers, and it's good. It tastes like beef, actually. It has the same texture and flavor. So it's not unhealthy, but you're not actually necessarily, like, if you're choosing that over meat, you're not necessarily saving yourself calories or fat. It's just you're eating a plant-based item versus actual beef. Are there any other questions yet? No? So I hope today that I have at least encouraged some of you to try tofu or to try some meat alternatives. It can be super delicious. It's pretty low risk. Tofu is very affordable, so if you were to cook with it once and decide this is not for you, you've not spent a tremendous amount of money on it. And it's a little bit better for the environment, a little bit better for your health, and just a delicious alternative. So thank you for joining us at Learning Kitchen Live today, and we'll see all of you back here next week. Have a great day.